Good day, good night, and welcome to Kevin on Soccer. Shocking, I'm Kevin, and I'm here to talk about soccer. Together today, we will have, of course, fun. And if this is your first time joining us or joining me here on Kevin on Soccer, welcome. If you have listened to episode number 1, thank you. Thank you to everyone that made this show what it was for the episode number 1, for your response, for your clicks, download, and your views. This show debuted top 30 in Canada, 28 after episode number 1, top 100th in the United States in the soccer category. This is really with your response is making me want to continue and do more of this show, and we will. Big episode for you today. We will talk about 2 big games in detail. We will have the debut of the breakdown. If you have watched my little preview videos on my YouTube channel that you can actually subscribe to right now, if you want to take a second, subscribe to our YouTube channel. But on my YouTube channel, I did some previews, some statistical analytical aspects, and I'd like to bring this back in this podcast. So today, the breakdown will be looking at LAFC in the Vancouver game number 1, and then Kansas City when they travel to St. Louis. Those 2 games, game 1 of round number 1, will be part of the breakdown. The second one called the Smackdown, because we'll smell what the Rock is cooking, with Kansas City being the only road team to win game number 1 in the Major League Soccer playoffs. And of course, we'll break down the entire playoff round 1, game 1, and the wild card that happened before that on today's show. At the end of the show, an amazing segment. We will look at the Ballon d'Or from a different perspective, very unique perspective, from the Footwear Wars perspective. Nike, Adidas, the battle for supremacy in the Ballon d'Or category. Fascinating. We will have a lighter conversation on that topic to finish the show. Just coming back from Los Angeles last week, I was present when LAFC gave a smackdown to Vancouver. We'll explain why later. Statistically, we'll analyze tactically also why this was the case, and I have a very big hunch on why this result took place. We will break it down. But let's start this show by looking at the wild card round, because yes, it happened almost 10 days ago now at this point, but there's a couple of aspects that I want to touch on. So let's look at the scores of the wild card, and there were 2 matches: New York, Charlotte, Kansas City, and San Jose. New York won 5-2 versus Charlotte. 3 goals for Elias Manuel, New York Red Bull player who's finally finding his feet, finally finding a slice to his liking in the pizza world of the Big Apple. Manuel, 3 goals, really propelled New York over Charlotte here. Great play by John Tolkien. John Tolkien, we're seeing him growing up in front of our eyes. We're seeing him become that type of player that we thought he could be. We knew he was a prospect, but now going from prospect to game changer. If we use different terms that he can relate maybe, and maybe what he is showing on his hair shows his growth. From John Tolkien mullet days, a little young, sometimes reckless, but always fun to watch. Ready to party, but business also from time to time, all the way to today where it's all business. Clean cut John Tolkien. But clean cut John Tolkien could be an amazing soccer player, and we're seeing his influence. We'll talk about the round 1 game in a few minutes. As you can see on the screen if you're watching us on YouTube, there's a couple of more results here too. But if you are looking at the other result though, on the other side, so that's pretty much sums it up for New York and Charlotte. Charlotte, of course, I think they overextended themselves, or overachieved is what I mean this year. They made the playoffs, a team that had no business making the playoffs in a season where maybe a couple teams dropped too many games late, aka Montreal. Charlotte should have never made the playoffs. They did. It was a one and done situation for the representative of the Queen City. But the interesting aspect to me is Kansas City. Kansas City continues to be hot, and they had a great game against San Jose in the wild card round. 60% possession, 90% passing accuracy, controlling the ball, controlling that game, controlling their destiny. Yes, it made it all the way to penalties, and we'll look at the shootout later. It was an interesting and, well, high quality penalty shootout. But as you see, in their last 10 games, Kansas City was 6-4, nothing too shabby. 10 games of the season, 6-4. It's over 500. It's not bad. But when we look at their last few months of the season, that's when Kansas City can justify their presence in the playoffs, and maybe why they performed so well in round number 1 that we will break down later in the second segment. Kansas City, since May 7th, has been the hottest team in Major League Soccer. As you can see, 13 wins, 7 losses, and 6 ties. 47 goals for, 37 goals against. And then they started the season in their first 10 games, 0-7-3. So the first 10, the last 10, and in between was really good for Kansas City. And that does explain their rise. They have the best record from May 7th to the end of the season in Major League Soccer. And that reflected in that game against San Jose. There were clearly a difference of depth between the two. Espinoza, very interesting, very good, not surrounded and supported in a proper way in a, team that don't spend as much with the San Jose Quakes. Let's look at the penalty shootout. Kansas City first to shoot. They won the coin toss. Statistically speaking, you are better off scoring first. You are better off going to the penalty spot, numero uno. And who else than Johnny effing Russell to the penalty spot, ready to put the ball in the back of the net. And he did. Boom. 1-0. Set the tone. He set the tone. The effing tone, Johnny effing Russell. Moving on to the first kicker for the Quakes in this shootout. It was Mr. Quake over the last couple of seasons. Cristian Espinoza. And no, denied, did not scored. It is a miss to Alan Pulido. Alan Pulido, good season. To me, he would be my comeback player in 2023, coming back from big injuries over the last couple of seasons, was never able to stay on the field long enough to prove that he is a good DP. Alan Pulido steps up and misses it. It's just 1-0. Jackson Ewell from Atlanta to Quakes. Can he step up to the spot and make it level to make it interesting? But no, he misses it. Also, no goal. It is still 1-0 after 2 rounds. Eric Tomey steps up, bangs it. Jack Scahan goes for the Quakes, and he buries it. Gadi Kinda goes it 4th for Kansas City, being able to make it 3-2 for Kansas City. 3-1 at that point, and he makes it 3-1. Carlos Acapo going 4th, needing to make this one to keep it going, to stay alive, to make the season continue for the Quakes. And Carlos Acapo, with the pressure of a team, of a season, of a fan base, of a city, of a Bay Area, buries it. Carlos Acapo makes it 3-2. There's a chance they need a stop. But Daniel Shalowi makes it, buries it, and it's all over. Kansas City moves on, and Kansas City gets their ticket for round 1 of Major League Soccer 23 playoffs. Here's the updated bracket after the wild card round. On the right side of the screen, New York beats Charlotte, New York will have a date with Cincinnati in round number 1. A 2 out of 3, best 3, and we will see what happened in a few minutes. On the left coast, the west coast, Kansas City, San Jose. Well, Kansas City moves on, and it will be the battle of Missouri, because Kansas City actually plays in Kansas City, Missouri. And Kansas City, St. Louis will battle it out for a chance to play either Houston or Real Salt Lake. That's their side of the bracket. And on the other side for New York, they're in the same bracket side of Philly and New England. And now let's go back to that scoreboard and look at some of the result of, well, the first round of the playoffs. Let's take a look right now at some of those results that we have seen in round number 1. We've talked about Charlotte. We've talked about the Quakes losing. Philly Union 3. The New England Revolution 1. Gazdag did what Gazdag does, which is scoring from the penalty spot. 19th minute, 1-0 Philly. Michael Ua makes it 2-0 Philly, and the floodgates are open. Nathan Harriel makes it 3-0 at that point. Gustavo Bu gave a little bit of hope to all the fan, the Bent Musket, and all the fan on the Revolution side. 3-1 at that point, but that all she wrote. Also, Carles Gil left the game with injury. That could be very costly for game number 2. Then a game that we'll break down in just a few minutes. LAFC and the Whitecaps 5-2. It is a performance of 2 goals for Hollingshead. Denny Buanga 2 goals in Murillo. Also for LA. Who else than Brian White for the Whitecaps and Sam Adikube? We'll break it down in the breakdown in a few minutes. Let's continue and look at the other scores that we have in round number 1 before we take a break. Houston, Real Salt Lake. Interesting. Big names steps up and makes it. That's important. Hector Herrera shows up, present for a big game, makes it 1-0 for Houston. Diego Luna, the young golden nugget of Real Salt Lake, had made it 1-1 at the 54th minute. But Bassi said no thank you. Bassi said no. And Houston, famously, I said I'm going to have questionable references on this one. Ain't no problem for Houston here. Houston, we do not have a problem. Bassi makes it 2-1. Fresh off a victory in the wild card round, the New York Red Bulls showed up at TQL Stadium full of confidence, full of happiness, full of hope, full of everything they could want. And they left TQL Stadium empty-handed, nothing in their pocket, bruised, battered, and slapped around. FC Cincinnati 3, New York Red Bulls 0. Alvaro Barreal with a brace, Luciano Acosta with a goal, both playing so well. And as much as we like to talk about the way to win in Major League Soccer nowadays might be to have a deeper team, no superstars, but a lot of TAM players, a lot of players to a lower level, but together the sum makes it better than the individual parts. In the playoffs, historically speaking, the cream rises to the top. It rises to the top. And when we get a matchup like Cincinnati and New York, the cream rose to the top, and we can continue on with our review of the score. The 4-1 victory of Kansas City in round 1 of the Battle of Missouri will be talked about later in the Smackdown, because there is a Smackdown. It's going to be felt, and if nobody is really careful, this could be the people's elbow, and this will be over before we know it. Orlando taking a 1-0 win in game number 1 versus Nashville is very indicative of how this series is going to be played. Nashville will need to keep it close. That's all they need to do. Nashville and his great musical scene just needs to be in touch. They're going to be at home, game number 2. They're going to get probably a 1-0 win too. That's the one series that's really not affected by the new rules because it's going to be a defensive one. It took a worldie of a goldie for Wilmer Cartagena to score on this one. Just to show you how improbable this right-footed curler was from 35 yards, a 0.06 expected goal for Orlando in that one. That is improbable type of goal for them. On Nashville side, 13 fouls, 26 clearances, that type of play that we expect from Nashville. Nitty, gritty, defensively, stay in the game, best defense in the league. If you are in the game, late in the game, if you are still in striking distance and 0-0 or 1-0 down, you can make it different. This time it took a worldie at the end of the first half to beat them, but they were technically still in the game and it could have gone either way. Now let's talk about the other two results before we take a break. Sounders 2, Dallas 0. This was a professional victory by the Seattle Sounders. Rosnack and Morris scored for Seattle, the usual suspect that makes it different. Velasco for Dallas was subbed out at the 18th minute, a leg injury. This could be very troublesome for Dallas for the second leg in this one. If you lose the second game too, the series over. That is interesting and probably devastating for Dallas. Columbus, Atlanta, Cucho, of course, who else? Cucho Hernandez, who is one of my favorite players when he's on form and in shape and healthy in this league. Amazing performance, 2-goal performance, a great goal, and then, of course, a penalty later that he buried. 14 shots, 8 shots on target for Columbus. Professional victory. When we go to Atlanta's side, that's 0 shots on target and 0.1 expected goal. Terrible performance for Atlanta. And this one, the offensive Atlanta that we expected did not show up. The second best attack in the Eastern Conference did not show up in game number 1 for Columbus. That is, of course, also on Columbus's side, their defense, they made a big difference. And that does explain why this result took place and why this game and game number 1 was won by Columbus 2-0. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we will be breaking down an amazing match between LAFC. Well, the LAFC side was brilliant, and we'll talk about Vancouver's not so brilliant set pieces play. And we'll have the Smackdown where we will look at why St. Louis lost to Kansas City. All that and more after this short break.
The future has already arrived. But the past
And we're back on Kevin on Soccer. I'm Kevin, and I'm talking soccer. Hope you enjoyed the first segment of the show. Thanks for sticking around, and thanks for being with us and subscribing to our YouTube channel, which helps us with the algorithm. The more you listen, the more you click, the more you like, the more people will discover this show, and that's the beauty of this show and the fun too. We're here to have fun. If you appreciate, enjoy the show, share, like, and of course have fun. And if you don't, that's all well and good, and that's good with me. You can also subscribe to the podcast version of this show on Apple Podcasts and everywhere you get your favorite podcast. It is time for the breakdown. LAFC versus Vancouver, game number 1. It was not close. It was kind of close for a little while. It was close until it wasn't, as we say. But there's a very good reason why. But we'll get there in a second. Let's just break down statistically this game. Let's look at why this was the way it was. Straight out of the gate, I was impressed by the fighting spirit of Vancouver. Yes, those are great words that don't say a whole lot, but I do like what it means. Showing up, being there, representing the coach, right? The fighting spirit. We talked about Vanni Sartini and how he is a motivator and great manager, and that is useful. That does have its place in the playoff, especially. I thought Vancouver had actually played better than I expected for most of the game. The score does not represent the game to me. 5-2 does not necessarily represent how this game went down, but 50.1% possession for LAFC, 49.9% for Vancouver. Shots, 19 for LAFC, 6 shots on target. That's way too many shots. Vancouver defensively, that's where they are vulnerable. That's where they got beat. And that's where I believe the big problem lies with how this roster is built. I love this roster. The best Canadian team so far, no problem, hands down. Over the last couple of seasons, Vancouver has taken this country's mantle. They are, to me, the best Canadian team right now. The best organization also in the country. And that was not always the case. It was just a few years ago. It was quite the opposite with all the stories that we've heard and that we saw in court, of course, also. But where LA got a big advantage against the Vancouver is set pieces. 4 set pieces goals for LA. Yeah, you heard that right. 4 set pieces that led to a goal in one game. That is insane. But when you think about it, it's not that insane because Vancouver is the worst team in the league on set pieces. They finished dead last in Major League Soccer with 14 goals conceded on set pieces during the regular season. And then you have the 4 goals. So that is 18 goals against on set pieces in 35 games. That is unacceptable. That is not how you do in the professional type 1, tier 1 type of league. In Major League Soccer, this is the difference between losing and winning a series. This is the difference between Vancouver maybe winning the entire Western Conference or finishing where they have or having home field advantage. Those 4 goals in one game is the difference between the win and the loss for Vancouver. Now let's explain why those goals took place. It's well and good to say that it's about, set pieces, man marking is bad. It's just they're not practiced enough. And it's technically there's about 30 to 35% of the goals that are scored off set pieces in the world of soccer. And it's a portion of the game that you don't practice 30 to 35% of your training sessions. Some coaches do put more emphasis on it, but never high enough in the proportion of time that it's taken in a training session, even overall this season. It doesn't equivalent to 30% or 35% of the output of training. But in the output of goal scoring, it does. So clearly, there's an influence with goals conceded or scored on set pieces and results during the regular season. The training of those two, there's a big difference. So if you take time and you practice them a lot and you have a mentality, a plan, a tactic when it comes to how you man mark, how you mark, do you use certain different ways to do it? What is your offensive mentality when it comes to set pieces, also defensively speaking? We would have to have a coach on to go more into details. What are the things you can do? Can you scheme it differently? Can you have a part of your players that are covering closer to the goal or are then man there and a bit of zone at some points? But to have some ways to stop being beaten off set pieces. But it's not just conceding on set pieces. The amount of goals Vancouver concedes on set pieces also tells me they need to limit the amount of goals they concede on set piece. It might seem silly, but look, I'm going to bring the stats back for the ones that are watching on YouTube. They gave away 12 corners. There's 4 set pieces goals, and it's not on the here, but they have 17 fouls and 16 crosses, which also can mimic sometimes what a set piece is. Those are all opportunities that Vancouver would say is the weakest of the two in this matchup. So the key to victory for Vancouver for game number 2 is not only to not concede any goal in set pieces, like none whatsoever, and then you're in a winning position. It's also to limit the opportunities that your biggest weakness, aerial duels in offensive position, and set pieces offensively, while you're defensively for Vancouver, but they concede too many goals there. Limit the amount. So you have to be disciplined. Limit the amount of fouls you do 45 yards, 55 yards away from the goal. Because they're never direct. It's always the ones from corners, from free kicks from far away, basically corners. Vancouver gave away 12 corners, so that's 12 set pieces opportunity right there. Plus the 17 fouls, about 7 were close to the box for Vancouver, so those gave also some opportunities for LA. And that is why Vancouver found themselves in this position. Not only do you have to play better during the actual set pieces, have a better scheme, or at least be mentally prepared. You do not concede 4 goals on set pieces, having spent a lot of time on the training pitch on that situation. Maybe I'm wrong, but you tell me. You can also tell me on emails, because social media is great, but I might not see your message. A way to not necessarily guarantee, but a way to go directly to my inbox is go to kevinonsoccer@gmail.com if you need to reach me. So yes, that's one of the big things. And we can, of course, look at the selection of team. We can look at Vancouver's lineup, because when I look at Vancouver's lineup that you can see right here, I don't want to call them weakest link, because I don't like to talk about professional players this way. They're the weakest link. Those are bad. They're terrible players. Terrible. They're really, they suck. I don't like to do that. They're professional players. They made it there. They made it further than most athletes ever did in their life. But Blackman, Veselinovic, and Brown, the 3-man backline, clearly the breaking point of this lineup. And that is what LAFC exposed. Coming in hot, Denis Bouanga, who's a monster. We'll talk about Denis Bouanga in a second. But that is where I saw the biggest point of emphasis that needs to be put for Vancouver. It's more discipline. It's a bit more structure for the back line to not leave, you gotta say, a man open, to not leave space on set pieces. But it's that. We'll see if there's some substitutions, or maybe some changes in the starting 11 for Vancouver heading into game number 2. There was some injuries for a couple of players. We'll see if this will change. But that was Vancouver's lineup. And if we go to LAFC, which was very impressive to me, LAFC, Vela, not so much. Denis Bouanga, I really like Oliveira too. Ilie, of course, always a mainstay in the middle of the midfield, able to distribute. He's been good since his early days in the league. Bogusz, impressive, but the backline of LA is tough to beat. Palacios, Chiellini, Murillo, and Hollingshead. Hollingshead, first of all, scored twice. That's what happens. Tall player, set pieces goal, there when you need to be, or in the second wave on the right corridor when Tillman helps him. Tillman stays back. Then Hollingshead is able to go forward with Oliveira and then attack together, overlap. Hollingshead finds himself in a position that he can just play ball close to the pitch, and you see what happens. That is not necessarily a good sign for Vancouver heading into the next game. That is not necessarily what Vancouver wants, because there's a statistic that you're not going to like. There's a trend that you're not going to like in this one. This year, Vancouver, after a loss, they find themselves losing again. They're 4 times this year. They have back-to-back losses in Major League Soccer. And that does not bode well going into a best-of-3 series when you lost game 1. the trend is saying there will be an uphill battle for the Whitecaps. They only won twice after a loss this year. So what we could call bounce back spot. Only twice out of 6 this year did they find themselves winning. 4 of those they lost, which led to 8 losses. That's almost the entirety of their losses this year in Major League Soccer. If we look at their final record, Major League Soccer, Vancouver had 10 losses. Out of those 10 losses, 4 came off a loss. So that's a pretty big proportion. 40% of their losses came after a loss. That's 8 losses. That is a lot. They lose in bunches. And unfortunately, they lost game 1, which gives them not a whole lot of emotion, or I should say hope, heading into game number 2. The positive, though, is the last game of the season, they played very well at home against LAFC. It was a 1-1 draw, and they missed 2 penalties by Ryan Gold that were not buried. So right there, that gives you an opportunity to motivate the troop. If you're Vanni Sartini, you can take advantage of that new format. The new best 2 of 3 with no aggregate goals. That's where it's important when you lose big. If you're Vanni Sartini, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if you want, I would go into the locker room after. I'll take my notes and I'll take everything about this and throw it all away. You throw away. Bye-bye. Let's forget about this. Let's forget about game 1. It's over. It's done. It's about the next one. Here's what we need to do in Vancouver on our pitch, on our bad plastic pitch that we are used to playing on. Here's what we can do in a filled BC place that will open the top bowl for the first time since David Beckham came to town. They're open the top bowl. About 30,000 people are expected in Vancouver on Sunday. I will be one of those 30,000. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and also subscribe to my Twitter feed or my X feed at Kevin Laramée or at Kevin on Soccer, that you can follow what I do, what I see, what I'll videotape when I'm there, of course, for work. And it's going to be, yes, I think there's a chance that Vancouver gets it done in game number 2 to force game number 3 that would take place on the 9th. So that was the breakdown. To me, that's where it makes a big difference. That is where Vancouver needs to get better set pieces, limit the amount of occasion for set pieces. So that means corners, but also fouls especially. I'll also include crosses. Be careful how you get beat when it comes to the sideline, close to the box, to avoid crosses into the box that could make your Bwanga really happy. Because he's a monster. And I'm going to have a swig of coffee and I'll talk about Denis Bwanga because he's my type of DP. And I'm going to have to tell you why. Denis Bwanga is the type of DP that comes in Major League Soccer and has success. Why? Because of that second, third, fourth effort. He's what I call a hungry player. He's there not just to show up. He doesn't just expect things. He doesn't come in and because he had a certain career and because he has a name and a reputation and of course he looks at himself like this. He's not just expecting things. Just like, oh, come on, give me the ball. I'm entitled. I feel entitled. Don't you know who I am? I said I was going to say what I think in this show. The Lorenzo Insigne of this world that shows up and points the ball where they want and give me the ball where I need. Come on, put myself in good position. That's not what makes a successful Major League Soccer DP. You don't come here and expect, you don't come to Major League Soccer and expect to receive the service you had before. You don't come into Major League Soccer and expect everybody to make it for you. You come to Major League Soccer with your hard hat, your work boots, and your ready to adapt mentality. You come here, you travel like crazy, you work hard, second, third, fourth effort, every duel. You get the ball back, it's never over, and that is the difference between good and great designated player in Major League Soccer. You show up like Denis Bwanga, and then you also have on top of it talent, and you can finish and have an eye for goal. You score 20 goals in a regular season, you get your golden boot, and up to the playoffs you go, Denis Bwanga. And that is a big difference, 2 goals in game number 1. One of the big reasons why Vancouver lost the game. One of the big reasons why LA won game number 1. From the breakdown to the Smackdown, Kansas City traveled to St. Louis, not that far, pretty close, the Battle of Missouri. And in Missouri, Kansas City loves to barbecue. And did they ever? Did they put St. Louis in the smoker and finish that brisket 90 minutes later? I think so. And that is why I believe it's not even going to be close. Kansas City is going to make it 2 in a row, win at home in the Cauldron, and make it to the semifinal of the conference. Kansas City made St. Louis play differently than they wanted to. Coaching masterpiece here for Peter Vermes. Kansas City made St. Louis play outside the perimeter. They forced St. Louis to beat them in the one place they thought that Kansas City had the advantage. Kansas City is confident in his defense, in their aerial play, and how they can be solid defensively around the box. And they made St. Louis try to break them down that way. Of course, we've talked about this earlier. We can put it back on the screen if you're just joining us. Kansas City has been the hottest team in the league since May 7th. Amazing record of 13-7-6, which this year, I have to say, no team really ran away in the West or in the East, so that's why this is possible. But that is also, to me, an indication that Kansas City was better than their record. Kansas City turned it around, learned a few things, adjusted their roster, and especially they found their preferred 11 heading into the end of the season. Let's look statistically at what it looked like on the field. Kansas City does not want to play with the ball too much. They'll let you have the ball. That's not a problem. Kansas City will let you beat them where they want to. And Kansas City, if we're looking here, they're not even that precise on crosses and everything, or passing accuracy. 68.5, that's very low for a Major League Soccer team. 10 shots for St. Louis, 6 on target, 15 for Kansas City, 11 on target. That's a high percentage of about 70% of their shots on target. That is why they have 4.1. They have 4 goals, because their expected goal is 1.4. Pretty low. This should have been a 2-1 type of game. Very opportunistic. Very opportunistic for Kansas City here. But Kansas City made St. Louis play outside. They made the best player of St. Louis not be efficient. And that's why I think is important, because we can look at St. Louis's roster here for the game. They're starting 11. When you look at the talented players, Klaus, Loven, and Blom, they're all close to the middle act, the middle line, which is the midfield. Stroud is great, but they were able to isolate and give opportunities on the Vasilev side. And they could deal with that. They were able to. For Kansas City, that was not an issue. And if we look at Kansas City lineup 4-3-3, they were able to put Pulido in some opportunities. But what I really enjoyed in this one, and we can look at the box score again to see, is what I liked about having Ndembe, Walter, Kinda, and Shaloi on the score sheet is 4 different type of players were able to win, to finish, to put himself in a position to influence this game. We're talking about playoffs here. You got to overplay your expected goals. To me, that is how expected goals should be viewed in a one-off situation like the playoffs. You come in, you can play really well, and one bad moment, you give away a shot. It's like a wonder goal, 0.0. It doesn't matter. That happens, and you can't do anything. But the closest your defense can be to your expected goals against, and the closest your offense can be to your expected goals, or at least if it can be higher. So if your differential of both of those statistics together are in the positive, so here for the soccer geeks like me or the stat geek like me, after the fact, it's easy to acknowledge, and those statistics you can learn more after the fact, but you gotta use it to reverse engineer why you did those results and then set up your team to make that statistic become the trend and the way your team goes forward. So expected goals for versus expected goals against, and that statistic, is it in the positive? And then you also correlate with the expected goals scored with the actual goal scored. And is that statistic in the positive too? And if those two together, added together, are in the positive also, it gives you an indication that more likely than not, you will be winning that game. It's that easy. Yes, it's that easy. It's not just the analytics. And then, of course, we can go into the whole debate of what is actually the best way to improve your expected goals. That depends on the player you have, the formation you play. It all depends on the attack and your philosophy, your idea of play, your project as a team. Those are all things that are correlating together. So, again, SKC forced St. Louis to break them through the wings. We've talked about that. It seems that know each other really well. And that is something not to forget. Kansas City is the first time in the last game that a road team between the two won that matchup. And we can look at a nice graphic here of those two teams when they face each other this year. 4 times if we include game 1 of round 1. The home team had won every matchup outside of the first playoff game. And not even close. 4-0 for St. Louis in game number 1. 2-1 for Kansas City in game number 2. The home team won both. Back to St. Louis, 4-1 St. Louis on September 30th, which is a month before they meet in the playoffs. And then Kansas City goes on the road. First time the road team wins in this matchup. The only time a road team won this year in the playoffs so far, at least in round 1. And Kansas City goes and win 4-1 on the road. Changing the way they play, giving a known opponent a different look, giving a known opponent a different style. Styles makes fight, but styles also makes results. And that style that was changed by Peter Vermees need to be applauded. You made a good move, and you also probably have won the series. At least you did, in my mind. Now let's talk about the keys to this game, because I do think there's a key, and that key is 2. That number is 2, because success comes with a goal or less for Kansas City. Their record when conceding 1 goal or less this year, including the playoff, is 12 wins, 3 losses, and 6 draws. Draws will lead to a shootout, and you have a chance to win. That's all well and good. When they allow 1 or less goal, usually they score 2, and they have a great record. But if you combine that record with St. Louis's deficiencies when conceding a lot of goals, so the gateway to the West, they say St. Louis, but the gateway to success for St. Louis is to score 2 goals. Because if they don't score 2 goals, they barely win this year in Major League Soccer and in the playoffs. The Lou has a record of 1-13-4 when they scored 2 goals or less in Major League Soccer in 2023. So you combine those statistics of when they allow 2 goals, when they score 2 goals, and you have yourself something that could balk the trend. The trend was balked. Never a road team won in that matchup. But also at the same time, the trend can be that it's always alternating. St. Louis wins 1. Kansas City wins 1. St. Louis wins 1. Kansas City won. The trend would say the road team wins for a second straight time in this matchup, and that St. Louis goes to the Cauldron and forces game 3. That could be possible, but I'm more of a, I think what we've seen will happen again. I think Kansas City, overall, the sample size is big enough now. I think Kansas City's hot streak since May 7th will continue, and Kansas City might get a trip to face Houston or Salt Lake in the semifinals of the Western Conference. Game number 2 of round number 1 will take place tomorrow. Let's have a look at that schedule. When I say tomorrow, it's because we are recording on Friday morning this show. Saturday, New York, Cincinnati, game 2. Followed by Sounders in Seattle for game number 2 also. Kansas City, St. Louis on Sunday, the first game of the doubleheader, followed by the Whitecaps at home versus LAFC. 30,000 fans expected in Vancouver. We're in the mountains, so let's continue the mountain talk and let's go to Salt Lake City in Utah. And Real Salt Lake will host the Dynamo in game number 2. Atlanta, Columbus on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, followed by Nashville and Orlando, also on Tuesday at 9 p.m. And round number 1 will, at least game 2 of round number 1, will conclude on Wednesday, November 9th. And round number 3, if necessary, starts the next day. But for Vancouver especially, Wednesday, November 8th, New England Revolution versus the Philadelphia Union. That will be a great matchup. We'll take a short break, our last break of the show. After the break, our fun segment. Together, we'll talk about kind of geeky things, kind of things that maybe not all of you will like. I love all things fun, fashion, discussion. Also, Ballon d'Or, we'll congratulate the 2 winners, and we'll look at the Footwear Wars, according to the Ballon d'Or. And we're back. Welcome back to Kevin on Soccer. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being with me until the end. Thank you for making this show a top 100 soccer podcast in North America, baby. The climb has started and no one will stop us till we're at the top. Because like we said earlier, cream rises to the top. Rest in peace, Macho Man Randy Savage. I told you I was going to have questionable references, and that thing just started. Murphy, is that you? Well, Murphy did not. Well, I guess he is kind of Murphy, because Murphy's kind of like Jesus in RoboCop, right? Because that was a RoboCop reference, by the way. If you hear me say Murphy in this show, is that you? That's a Murphy reference. Murphy, RoboCop, of course. Masterpiece. Masterpiece of cinema. It's not just a movie. It's a film. Come on, Paul Verhoeven. Very questionable director, questionable tactics. I'm not going to go there. Women do not like to work with him. He's probably a creep. Yes. 2 of the greatest films ever made by him. RoboCop and Starship Troopers. But when we talk about RoboCop, we talk about Murphy, who's kind of like the Messiah in that one. And his crucifixion is in the beginning of the movie. It doesn't end. It starts with the crucifixion when Murphy, who's Peter Weller, the actor who plays RoboCop, but he's still the cop, and he gets killed by Clarence Bodiger and his crew. And of course, I could talk all day about RoboCop. Masterpiece. Masterpiece of cinema. Let's talk about another masterpiece. Lionel Messi. A masterpiece of soccer player. And for the 8th time, he's won the best in the world, Ballon d'Or. But he also has become the first active Major League Soccer player to win. And to celebrate, you will have a golden evening, La Noche d'Or, in November 10th, in Miami, where New York City FC will travel. Even though they're eliminated, it's all over. There's a friendly or a gala game between Messi and Miami and New York City FC. La Noche d'Or, the Golden Night. No reference to the hockey team, by the way. Here's Messi's statistics. in the 2022-2023 campaign that ended with, I guess, the Leagues Cup, because they include the Leagues Cup title in there. 55 games, all domestic competition, 32 domestic goals for Messi with PSG and Inter Miami, 25 domestic assists, 2 trophies, the League One title with PSG, not too shabby. Well, you can add the World Cup, but that's domestic trophies here. Leagues Cup title that they do count as a regular trophy, so there's that for you. 7 goals in the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, and he famously won the 2022 World Cup, player of the tournament, and all that. That is why he's won his 8th Ballon d'Or. And before we move this conversation to the footwear brand and wars, let's congratulate Aitana Bonmati, who has won the Ballon d'Or. She won also the World Cup with Spain. She's a midfielder, plays for Spain in Barcelona. She helped her country win the World Cup. She helped, against England in the final, and she helped Barcelona to win the league. It was enough to impress everyone involved and to give her the Ballon d'Or. Maybe it should be given to Jenny Hermoso, but I think they stayed away from controversy, unfortunately, and Aitana Bonmati is worthy of the Ballon d'Or. That's not what I'm saying, but Aitana Bonmati was not necessarily everyone's choice for, at least their first choice for the Ballon d'Or, but congratulations nonetheless to Aitana Bonmati, a worthy Ballon d'Or. Now, when we talk about Ballon d'Or, we talk about one way to identify the best man or woman player in the world right now, at least in the last season. And that's how companies can say, oh, look at me. Look at my big chest. I'm puffed up. I'm ready to go. I have the best portfolio of athletes. Because that's what it is. Companies, they have a big thing, big binder, and there's athletes are numbers and faces. And they represent that company by playing on the pitch with the shoes that have their logo on it. And they pay a lot of money for those athletes to have those shoes with the logos, like millions and millions, and over the years it's billions of dollars that they give to all those players to play with a swoosh, 3 stripes, a weird round with a hole in it. Look at all those logos in a second, but it's been quite a battle. And since 1998, 2 companies stand out in the Footwear Wars. From the mid-90s, those 2 companies took over and they dominate all sports wear brand. Of course, we're talking about Nike and Adidas, and those 2 companies dominate also the Ballon d'Or trophy case since 1998. When we look at Adidas, they've won 11th now, with Messi winning his 8th. It's their 11th, so 8 of those 11 are Messi. Nike, it's a mix of Brazilians and Portuguese. Nike usually is the sponsor of players like Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, Kaká over the years, and Nike also had Cristiano Ronaldo. Puma, some Italian players, Umbro, and UHL Sport. Now you even have Skechers and other companies going into the mix, but they haven't won a Ballon d'Or yet. But since 1998, Adidas and Nike both have 11 wins if you look at their athletes winning Ballon d'Or on the men's side. That's quite interesting to me because Adidas and Nike are battling for the supremacy of what I would call the sport landscape sponsorship. There's only so many aspects, okay? So I'm going to do maybe some questionable references, but that's what this show is all about. If you look at a supermarket, right, there's shelf space everywhere. And that shelf space, if you worked in a supermarket before, you know that companies actually will work with that supermarket to reserve and give a better price. If you give me this shelf, or if you give me this space, I'll have a better price. Eye level is very important because that's what you see. And in the bottom or the top is not as much, not as expensive. So you make your way there and slowly you're trying to make your way to eye level. And depending on where that row is, it's better. If it's milk, it's all the way at the end because it's a necessity. So you have to go to the end of the grocery store to get your milk. Rows on the way there will be worth more because you guarantee traffic in front of your product. And if you are at eye level on those rows going to the milk section, that's even more. You get my point? that is important. And that's what those companies are fighting for in the sports landscape, or here, let's be specific, in the soccer landscape. The shelf space is the shoes, the shirt, the shorts. That's one shelf space. Around the boards, digital ads. Now you have what's called mats, so digital overlay ads on top of screen that are made to look like fake ads that are behind the net, or those type of things. So you have mats for local broadcasting that are made nationally, but locally you can add them. So you can have different source, but that's a shelf space also. So all those shelf spaces, the decor inside the stadium, the sponsorship in the background of media interviews. So those shelf space are a battleground. That's where the war is being fought. When you get a big team, example, your Nike, and a few years ago, Nike with Chelsea. I'll use Chelsea because Chelsea, if you don't know, I can't say really I'm a Chelsea guy. It's not like I really follow and watch every game now. I'm truly a product of North America, where Major League Soccer is the be-all end-all of my soccer experience most of the time. I do have an eye open everywhere. But if we look at this thing, when they have a big team that they turn over, when they convert a team from one to another, it's celebrated as we got a big one. And then you found new shelf space, and then your logo is available for that new fan base that will potentially buy the jersey. But it's not just about the jersey. Imagine that company that you like, now Chelsea is Nike, so example, we'll use Adidas and Major League Soccer. So you're a Major League Soccer fan. Adidas is the company that sponsors all Major League Soccer's kits. And you're like, I really like Adidas, the way they do stuff, because they sponsor my team. I'm a big fan of this team, Major League Soccer. And then you find yourself buying Adidas shoes outside of just your sportswear. And you're finding yourself buying Adidas sweatpants that are not branded soccer, but it's just you like that, and Adidas original and all that. But the gateway to that brand was your fan base, and was your fandom, and was that shelf space that they bought. So that's the interesting aspect, that out of all the companies, there's still just a few that are really at the top. Other ones battle for it, and there's a ton more apparel companies out there, from the Macron, who sponsors all the jerseys in the Canadian Premier League, Puma, Umbro, UHL Sport, and of course, in an ideal world, I would love leagues in North America to have an open sponsorship for kits, meaning that Nike could have its own Major League Soccer team, probably the Sounders in Seattle. And I guess not. I guess it'll be Portland. It'll be the Portland, Oregon, right? Oregon is where Nike and all that company is. So that would happen, right? So those are the type of things that I think could be interesting down the road. Major League Soccer has a different way to do it, and it does have its advantages, because a certain amount of streamlining and the cost is like help. Anyways, those are things that are interesting to me. I'm a geek. I do like my capitalistic stuff also. I do like my merch and my stuff. You look at my back wall, my scarves. Like, I can't lie. I do like my Adidas, my Nike, my Puma, Umbro, and UHL Sport too. Best gloves, by the way. When I was a goalkeeper, UHL Sport were my favorite gloves to wear as a goalkeeper in soccer. I don't know if this is still the case. I haven't been a goalkeeper in a long, long time. But I'm willing to try. If you want to reach me, kevinonsoccer@gmail.com. But I hope you enjoyed this show as we wrap up episode number 2. We hope that you will be with us for episode number 3 coming in next week. Until then, you can subscribe to this show on YouTube, youtube.com @Kevin Laramée. Just look for Kevin on Soccer. You'll find our YouTube channel. Kevin Laramée is the name of my channel. Thank you for subscribing to this show on podcast form to continue to be a top 100, heck, top 50 in the States, top 20 in Canada by next week. I believe in us. It was good to see you again, and I hope to see you soon. And in the words of a great philosopher, until next time, have a great soccer.